Cedar Fair has been building its brand and making its name as one of the top amusement park chains in the United States over the last 30 years. The company became official in 1983 with the chain just including Ohio's Cedar Point and Minnesota's Valley Fair before acquiring 3 more parks in the 1990s. They had always been smaller than the Six Flags chain until a deal in 2006 evened the playing field. Suddenly, Kings Island, Kings Dominion, Canada's Wonderland, California's Great America, and Carowinds were all part of the Cedar Fair family. And if you look at the highest attended and most profitable parks, these 5 newcomers are among the top of the Cedar Fair chain. These parks represented a potential goldmine for Cedar Fair, but where did they come from and why were they sold off? This is the story of the rise and fall of Paramount Parks. The story of the Paramount Parks starts with a flood. The year was 1964, the location was Cincinnati, Ohio, and the victim was Coney Island, a popular amusement park that found itself under 14 feet of water. Coney Island was in a location that was not only prone to flooding, but it also had limited room for expansion and limited space for parking. It was time to look into relocating the park. This project was spearheaded by Gary Wachs, the son of the president of Coney Island, and made a deal with the Taft Broadcasting Company to get the project off the ground. Taft had just acquired the Hanna-Barbera division and was interested in a way of promoting it, and thought that a new theme park could do the trick. So Taft purchased Coney Island in 1969, and then purchased 1,600 acres of land in Warren County, Ohio, and this would be used for the new park that would come to be known as Kings Island, a combination of the Kings Mills area that the park was located in, and its predecessor Coney Island. Kings Island opened on April 29, 1972, and featured a brand new racing wooden coaster called Racer, which still stands today. It also had the Bavarian Beetle, a galaxy coaster that was relocated from Coney Island, and Enchanted Voyage, which satisfied Taft's desire to promote their Hanna-Barbera characters by featuring over 100 animatronics, along with a John C. Allen family wooden coaster called Scooby-Doo in the Happy Land of Hanna-Barbera. By the end of Kings Island's first summer of operation, Taft was so pleased with its investment that it wanted to recreate the success by creating a new park in a new market. They partnered with Top Value Enterprises to form family leisure centers and chose a 400-acre plot of land in Doswell, Virginia, and construction on Kings Dominion began near the end of 1972. Its gates would open on May 3, 1975. Like Kings Island, it would feature a racing wooden coaster, this one being named Rebel Yell, as well as a family wooden coaster called Scooby-Doo as part of their Happy Land of Hanna-Barbera. While the Kings Dominion project was under construction, Taft had their eye on another park nearby that had just opened its gates in 1973. This park was situated on the North Carolina and South Carolina border, and was created by Charlotte businessman Earl Patterson Hall, who had been inspired to make his own park after a trip to Disneyland and wanted to bring the Carolinas together. The park was called Carowinds. Hall's grand plan to create this massive resort with hotels, a shopping center, a golf course, and even an NFL stadium never came to be thanks to the 1973 oil crisis. And despite Carowinds being built and open for 2 seasons, the park's financial situation was so dire that it was sold to Taft in 1975. Just like Kings Island and Kings Dominion, Taft looked to a racing wooden coaster to be the park's main attraction and opened Thunder Road for the 1976 season, and was able to build yet another Scooby-Doo family wooden coaster to bolster their new Happy Land of Hanna-Barbera. Taft had their eye on the mid-Atlantic area, but they also wanted to expand internationally. In 1972, Taft proposed a 330-acre theme park in Vaughan, Ontario, Canada. They faced a lot of pushback from the local community, and Taft even flew some of the new project's prominent opponents to Mason, Ohio, to show the positive impact the park could have on the community. Construction finally started in 1979, and the park was open for the 1981 season. Taft operated these parks through 1984 until it completed a $167.5 million deal to sell its theme park division to King's Entertainment Company, which had been formed by executives from Taft. The parks would keep the Hanna-Barbera brand on its rides. King's Entertainment Company would acquire one more park, this one on the West Coast. The Marriott Corporation was known for its hotels, but decided to try its hand in the amusement park industry by opening a pair of parks in 1976. Both parks were named Marriott's Great America, and one was located in Gurnee, Illinois, while the other was located in Santa Clara, California. Marriott had soured on their parks by 1983 because of their disappointing earnings, so they sold the Gurnee Park to Bally Manufacturing, the parent company of Six Flags, in 1983. The Santa Clara Park would be sold to the city of Santa Clara in 1985. the city immediately hired King's Entertainment Company to manage the park, and 4 years later would sell the park outright to King's Entertainment Company. It's hard to believe that this story started with a flood in 1964, but 25 years later, Kings Island, Kings Dominion, Carowinds, Canada's Wonderland, and Great America were all under the umbrella of the King's Entertainment Company. In 1987, billionaire businessman Carl Lindner purchased the majority of Taft Broadcasting and the King's Entertainment Company. He let the King's Entertainment Company continue to operate the parks, but the park's performance started to suffer and there wasn't as much money being invested into them. Each of the 5 parks would receive one coaster during the Lindner years: Adventure Express and Aero Mine Train, Anaconda and Aero Looper, and then Vortex, Vortex, and Vortex, 2 B&M stand-up coasters, and an Aero suspended coaster. The owners of Kings Island were getting ready to exercise a clause in their contract that would end King's Entertainment Company's management of the park. But Lindner was looking to sell off these parks, and in 1992 he was able to find a buyer, Paramount Communications. The company had just undergone a change in leadership, and the new owner sold off all of the industrial properties and overhauled the company to focus on entertainment and publishing. The original name of Gulf and Western would be abandoned and would now be known as Paramount Communications, and they used the money from the industrial sales to purchase multiple TV stations as well as King's Entertainment Company's 5 parks for $400 million. This was part of a trend at the time where studios were buying into the idea of theme parks supporting movies. After this acquisition, MCA, Paramount, Disney, and Time Warner controlled 13 of the 20 most popular parks in North America. There was some concern that the market for these 5 parks was too small, especially compared to the Universal and Disney properties in Southern California and Orlando. But these parks were already successful, all but Carowinds ranking in the top 20 in North America in attendance, even if their numbers were a mere shadow of what Disney was pulling in. To promote their brand, Paramount would rename all 5 parks to put Paramounts in front of all these parks' names, and stated that the purchase would allow it to develop rides and merchandise based on movies such as The Addams Family and Top Gun. Paramount president Stanley Jaffe predicted that the former King's theme parks would create significant awareness of Paramount's $1 billion in annual production of movies and TV shows. They immediately started working Paramount Pictures into their new attractions. 1993 was their first year of operation, and they took one of their most popular brands, Top Gun, into 2 of their parks, a B&M inverted coaster for Great America and an Aero suspended coaster for Kings Island. The next year they would open a Wayne's World land for Carowinds and Kings Dominion, and the feature attraction would be the Hurler, a reference to a catchphrase in the movies. Canada's Wonderland would join the fun in 1995 with a Top Gun coaster of their own, this one being a Vekoma SLC. Kings Island and Kings Dominion would each get an indoor launch coaster by Premier Rides for the 1996 season, themed to the TV show The Outer Limits, and be called Outer Limits Flight of Fear. Paramount would also promote its brand within these parks with Top Gun the Jet Coaster at Carowinds and Face Off at Kings Island in 1999, a Tomb Raider Dart Flat Ride at Kings Island in 2002, and another Tomb Raider coaster at Canada's Wonderland in 2004. Paramount's final coaster additions were premier launch coasters themed to the Italian Job, coming to Kings Island, Canada's Wonderland, and Kings Dominion in 2005 and 2006. Not every coaster edition was themed to the Paramount brand. The company showed that they were dedicated to making their parks compete with the Six Flags and Cedar Fair parks when it came to thrill rides around the time of the first coaster war at the turn of the millennium. Their competition was adding record-breaking coasters, including Hypers and Gigas, and Paramount would not be left out, adding some of the most innovative coasters of its time. The most notable coasters that were added include the first Vekoma Flying Dutchman, Stealth, for Great America in 2000. Kings Dominion got 2 spectacular launch coasters, the Intamin Volcano the Blast coaster in 1998 and the Extreme SNS Air Launch Coaster Hypersonic XLC in 2001. And don't forget their craziest project, the only wooden hypercoaster ever built, the only wooden coaster that featured a vertical loop, Son of Beast at Kings Island for the 2000 season. As impressive as all these coasters were at the time, they all had major issues, and Stealth is the only one that's still in operation, now known as Nighthawk at Carowinds. In the middle of Paramount's second season operating these parks, they were purchased by Viacom, and Nickelodeon characters started making their way into the parks, including Hey Arnold, Wild Thornberrys, and Rugrats. And this move was also responsible for the Star Trek-themed attraction, the relocated flying coaster Borg Assimilator for Carowinds. In 1999, Viacom acquired the CBS network, but by 2006, Viacom and CBS would be split into 2 companies. The Paramount Parks were assigned to CBS after the split, and they immediately sought to get rid of what they saw as unnecessary assets, which included their parks. CBS saw the slow growth of US amusement parks, especially in comparison with parks in Asia, and didn't see the parks as a long-term profitable asset. The parks didn't fit in with CBS's media holdings to focus on its core TV networks, production studio, TV stations, and large market radio stations, and they looked to sell them off to a buyer who was more in tune with the amusement park industry. It did not take long for them to find a buyer. They had multiple bidders as early as January 2006, but it was Cedar Fair that placed the winning bid to acquire all of the Paramount Parks along with Bonfante Gardens in Gilroy, California for $1.24 billion. It was a risky move for Cedar Fair, who would nearly double their number of parks overnight and suddenly found themselves in charge of all 3 major parks in Ohio. But these 5 parks they had just acquired had brought in $423 million of revenue and 12.2 million guests for the 2005 season. Compare this to their 7 current properties that had brought in 12.7 million people with $568.2 million of revenue, and you can see how significant this deal was to growing the chain. Cedar Fair had hoped that it would bump up their annual cash flow synergies to between $20 to $30 million over the next 3 to 5 years. This purchase also included a 10-year license to use the Paramount name in front of the parks, as well as the names of the Paramount movies through the 2017 season. Cedar Fair declined to exercise this option, and the 2007 season saw a major rebranding of every one of the parks, dropping the Paramount name from each one and rebranding the Paramount rides to use generic names. The Top Gun coasters kept the fighter jet theme, but were renamed to Flight Deck and Afterburn. The Italian Job coasters kept the general theme, but were renamed to Backlot Stunt Coaster. The Star Trek themed Borg Assimilator was completely overhauled to be themed to a bird's flight, renamed to Nighthawk. Face Off was renamed Invertigo. Kings Island's Tomb Raider was renamed The Crypt, and Canada's Wonderland's Tomb Raider was renamed Time Warp. Some of the Nickelodeon-themed rides stayed on for a couple more years, but by the 2010 season, these were rebranded to use the Peanuts characters to fit in with the other Cedar Fair parks. Even though Paramount put in a respectable effort with these parks over its 13-year run, Cedar Fair's reign over these parks has been a blessing for each and every one of them. Other than their flagship park of Cedar Point, they have invested the most in building up Kings Island, Canada's Wonderland, and Carowinds over the last dozen years. They haven't been quite as aggressive with King's Dominion or Great America, but King's Dominion did receive an Intamin Giga Coaster in its 4th year under Cedar Fair, and the last 7 years have looked promising for Great America after basically being ignored for several years after the sale. It's hard to argue that any of these parks are worse off now than they were before under any of their prior ownership. Paramount's 13-year run is evident all over these parks, even if all the references have been stripped away. Many people are critical of the way that Paramount transformed the image of these parks, and the types of investments weren't always the best of the best that was available on the market. They did not see the long-term value for large budget investments, since the already solid attendance figures would not be affected much regardless. It was clear at the time that CBS's main concern was the slow growth of North American theme parks compared to the parks in Asia. When Paramount acquired these parks in 1992, the combined attendance for these 5 parks was virtually identical to the attendance when they sold the parks off in 2006. And as soon as CBS wiped their hands of their North American holdings, they signed a deal to build a billion-dollar park in South Korea to open in 2011. This was shelved, but rekindled recently and is now looking at a 2025 opening. There was also talks of bringing a Paramount Park to Osaka, Japan, starting in 2008, and a deal in the works for a $7 billion investment into a Paramount Park in Tianjin, China, as early as 2006. Neither of these parks materialized, but it showed that CBS had faith in the economic success of running a theme park, just not in North America, and they pushed hard to get into the Asian market. It's best that CBS sold off these 5 parks when they did, rather than continue to operate them with lackluster investments, because Cedar Fair has turned them into amazing destinations for tourists and coaster enthusiasts abroad. If you remember any of these parks under Paramount's ownership, let me know your experience with them in the comments below, especially if you can call any of these parks your home park. I personally was only able to visit Paramount's Kings Island back in 2002, and I was not all that impressed with the park back then. But now that it's under Cedar Fair's ownership, it's among my favorite parks in the country. So thank you all for taking this trip back in time with me to see how these 5 parks became linked together and how they all ended up where they are today. And I'll see you guys all next time.